Welcome. This is the First Wednesday program, a monthly program we host here at the Mill Valley Public Library. I'm Natalie Snoyman, Supervising Archivist of the Lucretia Little History Room. This is a monthly program that we host with the Mill Valley Historical Society. Thank you to Stella Peroni for organizing these events. And thank you to Franklin Walther, our Digital Services Librarian, who's helping out with the tech tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce Richard Torney, a historian for the Jose Moya del Pino Library and the Ross Historical Society. He serves on the board of the Kentfield Green Bray Historical Society and is also a docent for the Mount Tamalpais Gravity Car Barn. We're very glad to have him here tonight. And the program should last about an hour. Please hold questions until the end, and please make sure your cell phones are turned to silent. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Can you hear me? Yes. All right. So I always have a great deal of pleasure coming to do shows in Mill Valley because I spent the first 5 years of my life living here. My parents had a home at 91 Woodbine Drive, and the phone number was Dunlop 81957. So we left Mill Valley, bounced around the country, and ended up in Kentfield when I was 7 years old. And that's kind of the impetus of this story. My father had born and raised in San Francisco, and the house we were on was on Kent Avenue, kind of behind the College of Marin. And he told me that his family, when he was a kid, always spent part of the summer at the Russian River, and sometimes they would go to the ferry building and take a ferry to Sausalito and get on a train that went through Marin County out to West Marin and up to the Russian River. And he pointed out that the tracks for those trains were right behind the houses across the street from us. So there was railroads in our backyards. So I was fooling around out on the railroad right away, probably that following summer, and I found a rusty old railroad spike laying on the ground. And to me, it was the most precious thing I was hooked. I want to find out more about this stuff. When I was a Cub Scout, I got a merit badge for making a map about the railroads, and I started searching for photographs of the Kentfield train station. And it took a while, but eventually I got the first station and the second station and the third station and what was there after they were torn down and what's there now, sort of a time sequence. And I really enjoyed doing that. And in looking for Kentfield Station, I saw a lot of other stations, and so I wanted to try to do a slideshow that would show, what was there before and what's there now. Now, there's so much railroad history in Marin County that there's no way you can do all of it in one show. So I was searching for some element of local history to focus on my show. And the show was first done in 2003, which was the centennial of the beginning of the operation of the electric interurban system here in Marin County. The electric trains ran from 1903 to 1941. So this show, I'm going to follow the route of the electric interurban. There'll be pictures from way before it was there and way after, but I'm limiting it to the electric interurban route. So railroads in our backyards. Many people I need to thank, and I hope I have everybody on there, and if I don't, my apologies, and I'll add you when you remind me I should have you on there. So what we're going to follow today is from the ferry building in San Francisco, ferry boat to Sausalito, tracks ran along the water, and here's the Mill Valley branch, and continued through the tunnel into Corte Madera, Baltimore Park, Larkspur, Kentfield, Ross to San Anselmo. San Anselmo will follow the tracks on the main line, and that's the tracks that continued out to West Marin, Point Reyes Station, and into the Russian River. But the electric train stopped at Manor. So we'll come back to San Anselmo, go into San Rafael, and then go through Green Bray back to Baltimore Park. So San Francisco, named for the mission. Missions, the Spanish word for San Francisco. So here's an early version of the tower at the foot of Market Street, replaced in 1898 by a more recognizable at this time. So ferry boat ride from San Francisco to Sausalito in those days, about the same as it is now, a little under half an hour. And when you got to Sausalito, this is 1875 is when the steam trains began operating out of Sausalito. Now, Sausalito in Spanish means little willows, so named for the willows that grew on the hills near the creeks and springs that provided the source of fresh water to replenish the sailing ships in the early days. It was a big operation, passengers off to the right, freight on the left, and it's now a park downtown in Sausalito. And in this photograph, the trains on the right are the steam trains that are heading north towards Eureka, Willits, and the trains on the left are the electric trains that would either go to Santa Fe or Fairfax. Now here's control tower number 1 in the Sausalito depot. So you saw all those switches and all those tracks, so they have all these levers up here. It was called an interlocking tower, and it was set up so that you couldn't throw one switch that would threaten another one. And so there were people up there running the tower at all times. Here we see a electric train leaving Sausalito on the far left there. You can see control tower number 1 in the background. I want you to notice this Mediterranean building on the right. That's still there. And a little further down the tracks, remember Zach's? Yeah. And there's that Mediterranean building there. So continuing along, it had to go by Tiki Junction. Well, not in the early days. And that big building in the background there is still there, repurposed into office space. The first stop was called Pine Point, also known as Alameda Point. Alameda in Spanish has a number of meanings, one of which is a grove of trees. Now, this trestle was the original route of the steam trains from Pine Point to Strawberry Point, then it wound around and climbed over the ridge into Corte Madera. But there was a lot of climbing, a lot of maintenance, and really no customers out there. So they added this track about 8 years later, and this is the one that goes by Mill Valley and the tunnel into Corte Madera. So Strawberry Point's still there. Pine Point's kind of part of a art harbor. It's gone. So here is Pine Station. And you see the passenger shelter there. On the other side, this photograph here, I sure wish I could find a clearer copy. That is Ted Worm. And if any of you are aware of doing research for railroads in Marin County, and particularly the Mount Tam Railroad, Ted Worm was a great resource. So there is one of the power substations along the line. Initially, when they started running in 1903, it was filled with batteries that they would charge overnight, so they'd have extra power to put into the system, especially for the train starting. Finally, technology evolved, and they could run an inverter and didn't need the batteries. So here's Pine Point over here, and this bay has since been filled in. This is the bottom of Waldo Grade, probably under construction. You can just see the Golden Gate Bridge up there. Now, this complex here was the American Distillery. They made a lot of alcohol there. That was still operating when I was a kid, and I remember when our family would drive by there, if they were running and the wind was blowing, it didn't smell very good. Big fire in the 1960s burned the whole place down, and you could get a bottle of Guggenheimers or Supreme Rye. I don't think it was premium liquor out of that place because they sent it out by the tanker car. So that's Whiskey Springs Condominiums now. No surprise about that name. So trains out of Sausalito continued until 1971, and this is one of the last trains with the revenue freight on it. And it's crossing Harbor Drive, which is still there, with Molly Stone's just off to the right there. Now here's that bay we saw earlier, and there's the route of the tracks. When World War II broke out, Bechtel Corporation had a contract with the government to build a shipbuilding plant there. They ended up putting a single track closer to the road and started filling the place in. What they did is they dynamited Pine Point. Some 800,000 cubic yards of fill went into the bay, and there's Marin ship. And it's all covered with businesses now. Next stop was Waldo, named for a guy named William Waldo. He'd come out to California during the gold rush to make his fortune. He was a politician. He ran for governor of California in 1853, but it was an unsuccessful campaign. But he had a lot of supporters and followers, so the name Waldo still remains. Waldo Point, Waldo Grade. And this photograph is titled First Year of Operation, so this would be 1903. It's an electric train at Waldo. And I'm finding out that my before and after pictures since I did this show over 20 years ago, some of them are pretty old. So there's a plug for Kinko's. Well, sorry. Next stop was Manzanita. Now, manzanita in Spanish means little apple. And if you've ever seen a manzanita bush in full bloom, the little flowers kind of look, they're a little round, they sort of look like apples and a similar branch structure. But manzanita grows above 1,000 feet, ideally on well-drained, south-facing slopes. Well, this is all mudflats down there. You couldn't plant a manzanita down there if you wanted to. Research indicates that there was either a hunting club or a campground fairly nearby that was named Manzanita. So there's the Manzanita station. Now, point out, this is Highway 101. That's all there was. If you look closely in the background, you can see a couple of pile drivers. Well, they're working on the longest redwood bridge in the world, which crosses Richardson Bay in Marin County. That opened for traffic in 1931. And I always like to nitpick, yeah, it's the longest redwood bridge, but the drawbridge is all steel, so it's mostly redwood. So there's Manzanita Station there. Well, of course, couldn't handle the growing traffic, so around 1956, they started building a new concrete structure next to the old one, which they operated at the same time for a while, but eventually they tore down the old redwood bridge, and much of the wood from that was salvaged by the company that had the contract, and they had a sawmill in the East Bay, and a lot of that wood was repurposed. I know there's houses here in Mill Valley that have paneling from the old redwood bridge, and there's a couple of houses in Tiburon that are built entirely from salvaged wood. So eventually, okay, now it's 2 concrete structures with 8 lanes, and I'd like to have a photograph on a Friday afternoon on a holiday weekend. Sorry, I'm not willing to drive down here. That Caltrans little substation under the freeway is named Manzanita. So here's a southbound passenger train just before Manzanita on its way to Sausalito. That'd be the bike path today, looking towards Tam Junction. Now, I put some extra Mill Valley slides in for the show tonight, and some of them are pretty interesting. Here that's that same section, that's the bike path today. This would be at low tide. There's nothing there. And here's another photo at high tide, and houses are finally starting to get built. And again, that's Highway 101 right down there. Now, Phil Rhodes was able to identify these 2 stone pillars as being part of the Marin Heights subdivision. It was on the hill above Tam Junction in this area. Now note on the far right, you'll see Control Tower number 2, and this is the Mill Valley branch, and there's a 4-car electric train on that. And this one's kind of fun, Tam High School under construction. Now that looks like a football goalpost to me. Do you want to play in that area? Uh-oh. So this is the first day of operation, August 1903. The first segment of the electric that began operation was from Mill Valley to Sausalito. The rest of it was under construction, but this was the first section. That engineer is Charlie Stocker. He'd been a steam engine engineer for the North Pacific Coast, and when it turned to electric, he switched to electric. Now, the station there was originally called Mill Valley Junction. Well, that was causing some problems because people unfamiliar with the system would hear the conductor say Mill Valley Junction, and they'd get off thinking that they're in Mill Valley. Well, they're not. So they compromised and renamed it Almonte. Sort of means to the mountain. So here you see the Almonte passenger shelters and control tower number 2. Interesting setup there. The Mill Valley branch only connected to the main line towards Sausalito. Now, later when TAM was operating, there was a school train that came down from Fairfax Manor that would come down these tracks, and it would have to stop and then run in reverse and be switched on to the Mill Valley branch. Now, at the end of the day, when they were going home, the school train would come off and be transferred over to the northbound tracks, stop, and reverse direction to get back. And that's the bike path today. So TAM football field just out of the picture to the left. Now here we are on the Mill Valley branch, and again, that's TAM High under construction, 1908, somewhere around there. And that's what the high school kids wore in 1908. And here's a 1935 student. So dress codes have changed, and they've changed a lot since then. So there's an electric train going by TAM High School. And now it's Miller Avenue, of course. And there's Miller Avenue. So imagine you got stranded out at Mill Valley Junction and you had to walk into town. You wouldn't be so happy about it. This building on the far right was Millwood, the train station there. And this was before the electric trains came in and before Mill Valley was developing. Now, as streets were laid out, they picked up this same building and relocated it not far from this spot, and they renamed it Locust Avenue. So this is a photo from the Locust Avenue passenger platform. I want you to notice this gable roof building there. It shows in a couple of places this wonderful photograph that showed up during COVID. Wear a mask or go to jail. You know. So there's that same building. So this is the Locust Avenue platform. And it's still there today. Next stop was Park Avenue. This is early steam operations, later with electric trains running. And one single track was left in place after most of the other operations were gone. I guess for an occasional load of lumber to the lumber yard or the hardware store in town. And this photograph came from Jim Stevenson. I took this about 25 years ago, and Jim just took this one a week or so ago. So right around the corner from there, you see there's not much in Mill Valley when this photograph was taken. And it leads into the Mill Valley station. Notice it says Eastland. A guy named Joseph Eastland was the attorney that handled some of the transfers of the land from the Mexican land grants. And it looks like he wanted to change the name of the town. And I think people in Mill Valley said, no thanks. So it's Mill Valley. Named, of course, for John Reed's sawmill that began operation in the 1820s. Now, Fred Runner has said that the crew you see here with the cameras was the Edison Motion Picture crew, because they came to Mill Valley in 1898 and took the Mountain Railroad to the top and took films along the way, and you can still find segments of their film of the Mountain Railroad in operation. As the Mountain Railroad's popularity increased, they built a bigger terminal, and look how easy that would have been. A ferry from San Francisco to Sausalito, an electric train to Mill Valley, walk across the platform, get on the Mountain Railroad, and you're at the top of Mount Tam about 2 hours after you left the ferry building. Very popular destination. That was replaced in the late 1920s by Mediterranean-style building. And here you see a color photo with electric trains and taxis waiting to carry the passengers up into the hills around Mill Valley. The Mill Valley branch was the first to start operating. It was also the first to cease operation from electrics. That would have been December 1940. And it was replaced with Greyhound buses. So Greyhound used the terminal, and still taxis there. And I took another picture about 20 years ago. There's still a taxi there. But recently, I haven't seen any taxis. I think it's all Uber and Lyft now. So this is going back towards the main line. This is a photograph from Jim Stevenson's family collection. Jim is one of those boys there. And notice this building in the background. It's a duplex that you can still find on Miller Avenue. So we're back at Almonte. A couple of things to point out. This bridge, I'll talk about that a little bit, and this big building over here. So the building was the main power plant for the electric interurban operation. So some 60,000 volts came from the Colgate power plant on the North Fork of the Yuba River, and it traveled about 150 miles to get here to Mill Valley, and in its day, that was the longest distance that they had transmitted the electricity. It was an ever-growing grid, so this wasn't a single line to Mill Valley. So the 60,000 volts went into a transformer and was dropped down to 6,400 volts AC, running an AC motor connected to a DC generator with an output of 600 volts DC. So that's what the trains operated on. And there's still a PG&E substation. It's on Rockmores near Blythedale. The next stop, named Alto. Now, I showed you that painting that had the trestle going across Richardson Bay, and where it climbed over the ridge, the high spot was named Alto. Alto in Spanish is high. It's only about a half a mile away from here, so they just borrowed the Alto name for that station. And there's that bridge we saw in the earlier photograph. That was one of the first shortcuts to get Highway 101 off of Camino Alto. So you take this out to Tiburon Boulevard, and the first section of Highway 101 as we know it today was between Tiburon Boulevard and Tamalpais Avenue in Corte Madera. So when you got to Tamalpais Avenue, you turned back in and went back in to the bottom of Camino Alto at the other side. It's a bike path, walking path now of the Alto Shopping Center. During World War II, they were pressed for housing, so there were trailer parks right along the old, there's the Alto station. So, color photo with the wooden electric cars at the Alto stop. Down to a single track. The last train out of Sausalito in 1971 would have been running on tracks in this condition. Bike path, walking path now. And here's the tunnel between Mill Valley and Corte Madera. Now this entire system eventually was double tracked except for the Mill Valley branch, was always a single branch, and this tunnel was also only single. So the two tracks would merge, car would go through the tunnel and come out on the Corte Madera side. And here you can see the switches are still there where it went back to double tracking, but this is late in operation and it was only a single track. Now it's easy to get to that end of the tunnel, though it's been completely sealed up. Those are the ends of boxcars all welded together. So not hard to get there, but you better bring your boots because it's wet. Next stop, Chapman Park, named for the real estate development there. Notice there's paths that come down. That was a big selling point. Buy a lot here, build a house, you walk down and get on a train and you're in San Francisco with no time at all. Many of the houses in this photograph are still standing. And there's a much smaller stairway, and it's a bike path, walking path where the old railroad grade was going towards the tunnel. Next stop, Corte Madera, named for the Mexican land grant Rancho Corte Madera del Presidio. Cut wood for the Presidio. Interesting photo. You see the flat car closest. There are Chinese workers on there. And then next car back, well, they're not Chinese workers. Well, the North Pacific Coast would hire anybody that wanted to work for them. They were pretty liberal in their days. As a comparison, Peter Donahue's built a railroad to Tiburon. He would only hire Irishmen. So here is the Corte Madera station. And that's the Corte Madera Hotel on the right. And it's still there today. And So this is where that trestle, or the road that crossed by the bottom of Blythedale out to Tiburon Boulevard over the hill, and you'd come back in to get back on the bottom of Camino Alto on Magnolia. So this intersection, for many years, all the traffic going in this direction didn't have to stop. All other three directions, there were stop signs. So this is like this car just runs right through, other three directions stopped. And that would have been because there were trains running there. And if a car stalled and got stuck on the tracks, there's trouble. Well, it took them about 20 years to figure out, well, there aren't any more trains anymore. So they put in stoplights. You have to stop in all four directions now. So next stop, Baltimore Park, named for a group of men that came out during the gold rush from Baltimore, and their company was called the Baltimore and Frederick Mining and Mercantile Company. They brought a sawmill with them, which they set up in what is now Baltimore Canyon, and started harvesting the trees. Well, they sold the sawmill and went to make their fortunes elsewhere, but the name Baltimore Park, Baltimore, has remained. That's the early Larkspur Corte Madera School. So this photograph, we're looking at the main line that goes towards Sausalito, and these are the tracks that diverted and went over towards Greenbrae. So that's Control Tower number 3 and the Alexander Avenue Bridge, which is still there. And when I took this photo over 20 years ago, the underside of that bridge was still stained black from the years of steam and diesel exhaust. Well, they did a complete seismic upgrade on it, and it's all cleaned up now. But so there's Control Tower number 3 again. This would have been a passenger train that would have left Eureka the night before, gone through Santa Fe, and it's on its way to Sausalito. And the foundation for that tower is still there. And here's an electric train coming down from San Anselmo. I want to point out, you can see this fence there. They're 4x6 redwood posts painted green, and the top part is painted white, because if they didn't paint it white, the birds would paint it white. So, and that ran around almost the entire system with an attempt to keep wild and domestic animals and people away from the electric third rail. It wasn't a completely successful fence. There definitely were people and animals that were killed. When I was taking these photos, there were still a few of those posts left in place with a little bit of the green and white paint still on them. This is at Baltimore Park. So here's an early view. An old timer told me this building back over here was a chicken farm. And that if you were riding on the train and the wind was blowing in a certain direction, you could tell where you were with your eyes closed. So down to a single track. Most traffic from Sausalito would have gone towards Greenbrae and Santa Fe, but this one single track was left in for an occasional car to the Larkspur Lumber Company on Doherty Drive. And there's the first element of the bike path, walking path. Now this gutter here was used to bring power from the Baltimore Park substation. I'll show you in just a moment. And it's all covered up now. So just around the corner to the right, there's an electric train, and right behind it is the Baltimore Park substation. So same thing, extra power to get into the tracks to help the trains from Baltimore Park get to Santa Fe. The building is still there. The last time I checked, it's in relatively good condition, but not being used for anything. So hopefully they'll find a use that will preserve it and make it more accessible. Next stop, Larkspur. Now, there's an undocumented story about how it got the name. When the trains first started running, they told the landowners, if you build so many buildings and a business or something, we'll put a station where your property is. Well, a guy from England, Mr. Wright, bought a section of property here, and he and his wife came over to see it one springtime. And his wife noticed these purple wildflowers growing on the hills, and she identified them as larkspurs, and so the name is Larkspur. Well, there are others who say, no, those are lupins. So this could have been Lupin, or Lupin Landing. But anyway, Larkspur it is. The Larkspur station was one of a number of them where there were pretty elaborate gardens next door for people to enjoy while they were waiting for a train, usually taken care of by local residents. Again, late 1920s, replaced with a more modern station. And after operations ceased, the station was there in kind of deteriorated condition. But it is now the home of a Japanese restaurant called King of the Roll. And it's funny, it's run by a guy, he isn't Japanese, he's Chinese, and his name is John Wayne. So, but it's a good restaurant. I go there regularly, so I highly recommend it. So one of the kind of unique things about this, here's the station, there's the passenger shelter, loading platforms. All of those things are still in place, except there's no tracks and no trains. Next stop was Escalde. And here you see Corte Madera Creek with houseboats and boardwalks. Named for Jean Escalde. He was a Frenchman who had come to California during the gold rush, and he gotten a job working in a brick factory operated by another Frenchman named Henry Callot. Well, Henry Callot also planted the vines. He built this winemaking facility, had a restaurant. Again, this is Highway 101. This is the main road. Well, Henry passed away, Jean married his widow, and it became Escalde. And the winery building and restaurant building are still there. The actual stop was a couple of 100 feet away, where Bon Air Road is, because there was a big hotel, Bon Air Hotel, on the other side of the creek where the hospital is today. So this is where the passengers would get off to go to the hotel. And so there's Bon Air Road. That bus shelter, about the same place the trains were, the stop was. Next stop, Tamalpais. If you look on early maps of the railroad, you left Sausalito, this was the first station, because there wasn't anything else there. Now, it was named Tamalpais because nearby was the estate and home of Albert Kent and his wife Adeline Kent. And typical of that era, they didn't have a street address for their estate. They had a name, they called it Tamalpais, because there really is a stunning view of the mountain from their home. So it was named Tamalpais. That's interesting to look. There's a guy in there with his hunting rifle and a guy sucking on a cigar. I guess you wouldn't do that at a train station today. So there is a little later on, Tamalpais is on the end. I want you to notice the vines growing up at the end of the building here. This next photograph. So here's College Avenue. Again, Highway 101 up until about 1930. But you can see the Chinese laborers over here. I want to point out this row of trees that's just to the left of the railroad tracks. And that big dark glob in the middle, that's the shelter with all the vines that have grown quite well. So here's a little later Kentfield Station, and you can see, not clearly, but there's all the equipment for the electric operation. And yes, it floods in Kentfield. And this photograph, you see Mrs. Elizabeth Kent behind the wheel of her 1911 white Torpedo with her husband, Congressman William Kent, in the back seat. So this is the entrance to their estate, which is now Kent Woodlands. You see that same row of trees to the left of the track. And so they're waiting for that electric train to go by on its way to Sausalito. Now I put this one in. This is one of the 5-car school trains that just had gone by the Kentfield station on its way to Tam High School. And here's a rainy day in Kentfield with the train stopped and traffic control. Well, a railroad expert pointed out, you can see here that the third rail has been bent out of position. So it's most likely that this train was headed north and a car didn't stop and it drove the car into the third rail. I wouldn't have wanted to have been in that car with 600 volts. So then they moved the car out of the way and it's going to have to stay there until they can get a repair crew to fix the tracks. But this is College Avenue, again, Highway 101. And here's a little later in the same location with the electric trains double-tracked. And we still have rainy days in Kentfield. And this is the Kentfield station, the third one, the late 1920s Mediterranean style. And this photograph here, 1939, so 2 years before they stopped running the electric trains. The building off to the right was the Kentfield Post Office. And this photograph, you can see the patches in the road. They've just torn the tracks up. So this would be, they stopped running the electric trains on February 28, 1941, and tracks were gone not long after that. But there's the Kentfield Post Office. There's that row of trees. This car is going down Kent Avenue. Now, I showed this photograph to a guy named Gino Corby, who'd grown up in Kentfield, and he said, "That's Tony Milani's 1938 International Flatbed truck." that he had ridden in as a young boy because his father and Tony Milani were friends. So I always wondered, where was that post office in relation to where things are today? And this photograph I got from the Minto family that ran the gas station. There's the post office. So it was just behind the gas station. Now, it's remained there after the trains stopped operating, and when they built part of what is now the Woodlands Center, they moved a new post office over there. This building wasn't torn down. It was picked up and moved down the street a little bit. Originally, it was a paint store. It's been businesses. This photograph, it was an Episcopal church. And as of about a week ago, it's vacant. So if you know anybody who wants to lease a post office, they're looking for tenants. So back to the Shell station, you can still see those were elm trees that had been planted by the Kent family. In the background, you see this wood construction. That's a Jolly store being built in 1957. And it went through a number of owners. It became a Calla Market and Burns Food and Carriage House. And now it's the Woodlands Market. And the Shell station was Valero for a number of years, but now it's Fuel 24/7. Next station, Ross, named for James Ross, and he had purchased the Mexican land grant Rancho Punta de Cantin in 1857, and sadly he died in 1862, so he didn't get to enjoy it for long. But here's the station that was built on property that was given by his wife. And here's one of the early narrow gauge steam trains at Ross Station. And that one had a very elaborate garden. It was said that people would get a picnic and hop on the train, and when they got to Ross, they'd get off and have a picnic, and when they were done, they'd get back on the train and continue their journey. Now, all of these palm trees were killed in a winter storm, I think 1913, it snowed, and replaced with roses. And many of the large estates would send their gardener down, and they would have a certain section to tend, and there was a big competition to see who had the nicest roses. So most of the photographs of train stations are taken from the side with the tracks. Well, I'm going to go over to the other side. So this is Ross Common today. The tracks are on the other side of the train. So there's the first station, replaced in the late 1920s with the Mediterranean building. Now, this building was later used as the headquarters for the Marin County YMCA when it was first founded in the 1950s. Well, Ross got a really a great offer. There was a local contractor who'd grown up in Ross, Dick Zollner, and he told the town, "I will tear down the old train station. I will build you a brand new post office at no cost to the town." So they accepted the bargain. What the deal was is he got the lease with the post office, I think, for 30 or 35 years. So he got paid eventually. And when that lease was completed, the property reverted to the town of Ross. Well, about 25 years ago, a number of residents were tired of this dated 1960s architecture, and private funds were raised to remodel the exterior of the building. They really did very little on the inside, but they chose as the design the old train station. So it's a lot bigger, but it's similar. So next stop, Bolinas Avenue. And here you see electric trains at the Bolinas Avenue passenger shelter. Here's a little later down to a single track and only one shelter, but the loading platforms are still there. And this photograph, Sir Francis Drake Boulevard is one lane in each direction off to the right, and the railroad right-of-way was still there. Now, in order to duplicate this photograph, I realized I would have had to set a ladder up in the middle of Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. I chose not to. And I moved over to the right a little bit. So here's the old railroad right-of-way. The other part of Sir Francis Drake, this is San Selmo Avenue. Then, when you got to what is now San Anselmo, the railroad called it Junction, because these tracks here, that was the main line that went out to West Marin, Point Reyes Station, and towards the Russian River. This was the line that ran into San Rafael. So that's Red Hill behind it, with hardly a tree on it. And here is the electric system being installed in San Anselmo. So this is somewhere around 1903. A few more trees on Red Hill. And here again, this is Highway 101 again, up until 1930. So it would have turned right towards San Rafael. You see an electric train by the station. Another shot. And this was the 1930 replacement station in San Anselmo, a little bit different style. And electric trains at that location. And so eventually, when the train stopped operating, they were replaced with Greyhound buses. You can just see the end of the Greyhound bus sign that's sticking off of the old train station. And buses parked in the lots in the background there. So eventually the train station was torn down. Here, Sir Francis Drake Boulevard is one lane in each direction. Well, eventually they widened, and now there's 2 lanes in each direction. Red Hill pretty much covered with trees. But looking in the other direction, there's that original Junction station. So this train would have just come in from San Rafael heading towards Sausalito. And there's the tracks that head towards West Marin. A little later, 1885, a cold winter day with snow on Mount Tam. And this is that same area. You can see the seminary in the background. I was told that this building here was Needham's Tea House, and during Prohibition you could get tea in the front and stronger beverages in the rear. So this photo from the Marin History Museum is titled Waiting for a Parade, so it would have been 4th of July in San Anselmo. Now this is called an aerial view. It's from up on Red Hill. So there you can see the tracks coming in from San Rafael, tracks from West Marin heading towards Sausalito. And next photograph is a little later. All the tracks are gone. There's Greyhound buses there. And I tried to duplicate that by climbing to the top of Red Hill, but it's so overgrown, I had to climb up a tree to be able to take this picture. But anyway. So now we're going to follow the tracks off to the left. That's the main line heading towards West Marin. That's control tower number 4. And right behind it was the San Anselmo power substation. There's a train heading towards West Marin. There's the back of the power substation. And there was a trestle that crossed Corte Madera Creek. Now right where that trestle landed, after it was torn down, you can see the last bent there. Well, this railroad right-of-way is now Center Boulevard, going towards Fairfax. First stop along the way was Yolanda. And Yolanda, the name comes from ancient Greek, Iolande. I don't know how you pronounce that in ancient Greek, but it's the name for the flower violet. So it was a microclimate here, and violets grew in profusion. So Yolanda is named for the flower violet. And a number of years ago, some local residents pooled some money and they put a little concrete bench there that says Yolanda Station. And notice the concrete loading platforms are still in place. Next stop, Lansdale. This is San Anselmo Avenue and the railroad crossing back there. Originally, it was on a trestle and a bridge, eventually culvert and fill. And that building right behind the train is still there on Center Boulevard. Next stop, Pastori, which was named for a nearby restaurant, very popular with San Francisco residents, especially during the foggy summer. They could take a train and be in Fairfax in about an hour. And there was this warm, sunny place where they could have lunch and dinner and dining and dancing, and then hop on the train and be home in an hour. So this is the Pastori station. Was eventually purchased by the Emporium department store, and they built a big recreation area for their employees. And they wanted to rename the station Emporium. The local residents were not interested. It remained Pastori. Now that compound was eventually sold to private owners, and it was the Marin Town and Country Club, which I'm sure some of you went to back in the day. And they're still trying to figure out how to develop that property, but there's a 5-car school train at Pastore going back towards Fairfax and Manor, and it's the Fair Anselm Shopping Center today. Next stop, Fairfax, named for Charles Snowden Fairfax, sometimes called Lord Fairfax. Well, he never was Lord Fairfax. He was from the family descended. He was from the Fairfax, Virginia family, and was actually offered the position to become Lord Fairfax in England, but he had to have given up his United States citizenship and moved back to England, and he chose not to. So he's just Charles Fairfax. There's the Fairfax station, early version. There's the tracks off to the left. And all the smoke you see in the background, Fairfax was a very popular weekend and summer destination. There was a big park back there, and that smoke from the barbecues that they had. Another prohibition story is a guy got off the train in Fairfax and asked the conductor, "Where can I get a drink here in Fairfax?" And the conductor said, "You can get a drink anywhere except the post office." So, so it's the Parkade, and the Alpine building is still there. So continuing, here you see the tracks crossing Sir Francis Drake Boulevard just north or just west of Fairfax. Now today, Sir Francis Drake Boulevard has been diverted onto the old railroad right away. Last stop on the electric system was Manor, named for the subdivision Fairfax Manor. Notice that bridge in the foreground, which is still there today. And that was the last stop for the electrics, but you can see a train in the distance. Well, there were some sidings, so after the last passengers got off, the train would go down to the siding where it could be cleaned and prepared and ready for service the next morning. Now, Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. So back to San Anselmo. We're going to head towards Santa Fe. This train would have just come in from Santa Fe and would be picking up passengers and joining a train from Fairfax at the San Anselmo Depot. That's the Tamalpais Theater on the right. And here's a train leaving San Anselmo heading towards Santa Fe, and you can see it's working pretty hard, but it's a fairly steep grade. The little wagon road on the right, that would be Red Hill Avenue today. Now this was an excursion train. Shortly after they stopped running the electric trains, this excursion train was a one-day deal, and it went to all the stops on the electric route, sort of as a last hurrah. So that's Red Hill Avenue. This is Greenfield Avenue, and today, both of them are Red Hill. Greenfield is still there. Next stop was Highland, and here you see a train passing some buildings on the way to Highland. Now, I've made this up completely. The tracks go downhill to San Anselmo. The tracks go downhill to the right to Santa Fe, so it's the Highland. Now, there may be a real estate subdivision there named Highland, but I haven't found out yet. And notice this little palm tree here. I wonder if that's the same one, because that's where the state, or maybe a descendant of that palm tree. Next stop, West End, and as you can see, this is really the end of Santa Fe. This is looking towards San Anselmo. This is 1877, so 2 years after the steam trains began operating. And they built a much more elaborate shelter at West End. And when they first started running the electric trains, it was only a single track, and it would fit through that same shelter. But when they double tracked, it wouldn't fit, and they were left with this kind of odd little thing on the side. And that was one of the things an organization called Marvelous Marin was complaining to the railroad about the deteriorated condition of many of the stops along their route. This was late 1920s, and so many of the Mediterranean buildings we've seen from the late 1920s were a result of that effort. And there's the one at West End. Now, this building on the right is still there, part of Cafe Ribadurci. Now, originally, the single track came right down the middle of 2nd Street. These hip roost buildings are still there. And at B Street, the tracks curved off of 2nd Street. And here you can see, so there's B Street crossing there. So these tracks just came off of 2nd Street. Now the building you only see part of on the left, I'm sure you'll recognize, it's the Flatiron. And now you know why it's shaped like that, because there are railroad tracks right there. So the narrow gauge from Sausalito came to the San Rafael station, which was already there because there was another railroad that was the San Rafael and San Quentin Railroad, the first railroad to operate in Marin. So they were kind of competing with each other, so they ended up, the San Rafael and San Quentin was taken over by the North Pacific Coast narrow gauge, and they operated not in competition. So the San Rafael name only remained until the Peter Donahue's line came down from Sausalito on the way to Tiburon, and they built a much larger station nearby in San Rafael. So that took the San Rafael station name, and this one became the B Street station. Eventually, that building was replaced with this smaller Mediterranean building, late 1920s. That building is not where it was originally built, but it still exists. You see this photograph here, there's the train station. They just picked it up and moved it down there. This is the old railroad tracks, and that's the baseball field in San Rafael. So there is a little train station. This is right behind the parking lot, bottom of A Street by Safeway parking lot. The last time I checked, it was a hair and nail salon. So the trains left the B Street station and curved around to get to the main station. And this is a section where now this is where the tracks had curved around. And if you've been in San Rafael anytime recently, it's now a homeless encampment. That's all tents all the way along there from, this is the bottom of Lincoln over to Anderson Drive. So this was the larger San Rafael station. Later became the headquarters for the Northwest Pacific Railroad, and the whistle stop was there. But look, here's one of the passenger trains that would connect Eureka and San Rafael. So, and there's an electric train. So if you were anywhere in the electric system, you could go into San Rafael in the electric train and get on or off the steam trains running between San Rafael and Eureka. A really pretty well-oiled system. This is, I think, the last steam train, 1958, somewhere in there. And you can see the whistle stop station, or San Rafael station. Down to a single track. The last train with paying freight in San Rafael was in 1981. And that's Jack Farley on the right, and a railroad guy. And so then Whistle Stop took over what had been the railroad headquarters, and they were there while they were building the SMART train tracks, which are now completed, and there's trains running right through there. So I put this in. This is February 1941, so this is the last month of operation of the electric system. If you were at the ferry building in San Francisco and you wanted to go to San Rafael, a one-way ticket was 35 cents. Round trip 50 cents, and you would leave the ferry building at 5 p.m. and be in San Rafael at 5:55. If you were going to Fairfax, you would be in Fairfax at a few minutes after 6, so pretty efficient system. The commute book up on the top was $5 a month, so you got a round trip every day. So if you rode the train every day, $5 for a month, that's less than 9 cents a trip. So pretty good deal. Now here's a train leaving. There's the big San Rafael station, control tower number 5. An electric train, same thing. And they head out towards crossing Anderson Drive. So this was the main line to Tiburon. This is Anderson Drive, which was the San Rafael and San Quentin Railroad. So that's where the trains are crossing it now. So, and just beyond that, there's a train with a kind of odd load of cars going under the old Highway 101 overpass on its way to Tiburon. And the tracks were there for many years. This is that little wooden trestle that is still there, right where Bellum and Anderson Drive meet. And this photograph probably 25 years ago. There's still some tracks there, but obviously not in use. And now they're running smart trains in that same spot. So there was a station there originally called Schuetzen Park. It was, they had camping grounds, restaurants, dance hall, roller skating rink, and a lot of shooting. They could have target shooting, skeet shooting, and it was very popular with the local German-American population, but everybody went down there. During World War I, there was a lot of anti-German sentiment, so they changed the name from Schuetzen Park to California Park. So there's the California Park compound. That's where the Marin Square Center is now. So this is the California Park passenger shelter. Now that's the old Santa Fe and San Quentin Railroad. Wasn't really in use, but they left the tracks there, and it was a place where they could store unused boxcars and flat cars. So there's the California Park stop. Here's an old photograph for you. That's Marin Outdoors, which is now Smart and Final. So just past that, there was Tunnel 3. This is between Santa Fe and Greenbrae, closed off to try to keep people from living in there. And this is when they started working on it to get it ready for the SMART train. And they got the bike path passenger half done before they got the trains running on the right-hand side. So there's an electric train coming out of the tunnel on the Greenbrae side, heading towards Sausalito. And a little later on, a steam train in the same direction. And now it's just down to a single track. And it got pretty overgrown for a while. And then they started cleaning it up for the SMART train. And I had the good fortune of getting together with a bunch of other railroad nutballs, and we were given a tour of the tunnel operation. And one of them, one of the guys there, was skilled with Photoshop and gave us this. You will not be seeing a freight train in Greenbrae. So Jeff Kramer took this photograph, early 1970s. Notice there's a siding over here. These are mostly privately owned rail cars that were just kept there. And I can't help but wonder if some of them might have become part of the Victoria Station restaurant, which is just out of the picture to the right here. So there was a station there named Greenbrae. Notice it's two words, Greenbrae. It was built by James Ross's son, who was also named James Ross. He operated a dairy in that area and named it after his father's Scottish ancestral homeland. So here we see the Greenbrae station, and then there it is again, the tunnel. Now look at, here's Highway 101, 3 lanes. One northbound, one southbound, and the lane in the middle was for left turns and passing, and unofficially known as the suicide lane. So now there's SMART trains at pretty much the same spot. Now just beyond that, there was that trestle. Now across Cornabadera Creek, this was the main line towards Tiburon, but when you get down near where the Cost Plus area, there was a switch that went off to the right. It was called Detour, and it connected to the tracks that went over to Baltimore Park. So it was the cutoff. And this was the trestle that Dirty Harry movie, where he jumped off the trestle onto the school bus. And some years ago, it was damaged when a truck ran into it, and I can't believe that it was damaged so badly that a trestle that would hold a 60-ton train is going to be bothered by a splintered timber. But I think it was more politics. They needed to widen the road and add some lanes, so piece by piece, down it went. And now there's a new bridge across in about the same place, and I don't think Clint Eastwood's going to jump off of that one. So there's the gap where the trestle had been. So like I said, you cross here, and then there was a switch and a line over towards Baltimore Park. And this is taken from the freeway, Highway 101 highway overpass, where the tracks went over. This is heading towards Baltimore Park. Now, next time you're at the DMV, which would be right around here, and you're driving under to go over to Cost Plus, look up underneath the overpass, and you can see the original concrete girders. 1929, that's when that was built. So that segment opened to traffic in 1930. So when they built the handicap styrofoam factory, they got their own siding because they would get box cars of plastic pellets. And you'll probably recognize this from years ago with a plume of steam coming out of the handicap, which later became Windcup, and that closed down, and they tore the whole thing down, and they built the Tam Commons apartments that are quite visible when you drive by on the freeway today. So just beyond that, there was a little bridge called High Canal, and in the background you see the hills that are now Greenbrae. It doesn't show in this picture, would have been covered with cows because that was the dairy. Bridge was gone for many years, but some time ago they put in a bridge for bicycle paths. So there's Greenbrae, no more cows, but lots of houses. So just past that, this is the backside of the gymnasium at Redwood High School. So the old railroad right-of-way is now a bike path, walking path. And this train will be going around a curve to the left by the Baltimore Power Station. And for years, I've wanted to find a photograph of a train with a caboose on it. Well, Joe Breeze used his Photoshop and got me the caboose, and that means it's the end of the show. Thank you.